Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. I am excited to be here with you all on this wonderful evening. I hope everybody had a great start to your week, or depending where you are in the world, it may already be evening or well into Tuesday. But wherever it is that you are, thank you so much for making us part of your day. And I'm definitely excited to be here with you with an amazing guest who's definitely got an amazing story. And I'm just so excited for him to share his passion and share his story with all of you all. But before we get to that, I just want to say again, thank you so much for all the likes, shares, and follows. Thank you so much for dropping us some great reviews, 5-star reviews. I really appreciate it. As you know, our mission is to connect educators and creators one show at a time. And then that way you can go ahead and learn something from our guests that you can sprinkle on to what you are already doing great. So thank you as always from the bottom of my heart. So again, let's go ahead and get started. I am so excited here to welcome Mr. James O'Neill. Mr. James O'Neill, how are you doing this evening?
Hey, Fonz, I am doing amazing, man. It's been a great day. And so I am doing good. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much. It is a great week. We're starting again. I did post on Twitter earlier today. I was like, hey, every Monday, kind of like a fresh start. It's a clean slate. Show ourselves some grace and let's just continue moving forward, learning how to improvise, adapt, and overcome because whatever comes our way, the weekend's always around the corner. So,
Yes,
so
sir.
yeah,
That's a great way to look at it. A
yes,
great way
sir.
to look at it.
Yes, sir. Well, James, again, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I'm really excited about today's topics because today, I mean, we're not only going to be talking about math, because I know you're definitely a math guy, but I want to definitely get into the body of work that you do because not only, being an educator, but, being a public speaker and just some of the things that you do. I will be sharing your website throughout the chat also as well for any audience members that will be with us live, but I definitely want to share your resources out there because I absolutely love the work that you do. But before we get into that, James, if you could, for our audience members that are catching us right now live or those that will be catching the replay and may not be familiar with your work yet, can you give us a little brief introduction and your context and education before we get into that superhero origin story?
Yeah, cool. That works. Hey everybody, I'm James O'Neill. I am an eighth grade math teacher here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have been teaching for 15 years, 15 years in the classroom as a math teacher, specifically eighth grade. I did 1 year ninth grade, but it was just like eighth graders in a new building. So I don't really count that as like 1 year of high school. I officially started an LLC called Mastery for All in 2020 during the pandemic, where a lot of people started their own businesses and started to branch out and do some things. Mastery for All really centers the work of math education, but my specific focus is my heart for Black males in math education because of the demographics of where statistically they are always scoring. If you look at the graph, if you just look at the trend of Black males in education, usually they are really high in the negative and really low in the positive. And so, as I identify as a Black male as well, with my story, which I'll get into later, my work really undergirds making sure that there is mastery for all, and not just as a slogan, but if we lift those that are at the bottom, everybody that's on top again will be lifted as well. And so that's where majority of my work outside of the classroom happens, where I'll be a contracted employee with different nonprofits, and I work with them, and I speak and do professional development for teachers just to support the work of great math instruction, because I really believe it's a gateway subject and everybody needs access to these gates. So that's pretty much the little blurb about me.
Yeah, excellent. And I just shared your website and I know all of that will be on the show notes, but I really love what you have done, going through your website. You definitely seem like you have just an amazing personality, just the pictures that you have on there. Most importantly, too, the YouTube videos that you have, which I highly recommend for all our audience members that are listening or watching live. Please make sure that you do go visit mrjamesoneil.com, so you can check out those videos because when you listen to them, you definitely hear such a powerful story, a powerful voice, a powerful experience that we're going to get into right now. Because, as you know, Mr. James, I know that you just gave us just kind of that brief introduction. But for myself, every guest that I have on here is somebody that I have seen do some amazing work. And just like I described your work right now, almost very superhero like, and we all know every superhero has an origin story. So I would definitely like to dive in deep to your superhero origin story from where this all started. And I always like to ask if you can also share with us if education was something that you already planned to go into from very early on, or was this something that came in later in life?
All right. So I'll start with that question first, and then go into the story. So education was not something that I was planning on doing, because of the narrative that I heard in North Carolina always growing up. The teachers don't make enough money, and blah 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 blah. So I heard that negative narrative all my life, and I was just like, why would I go to college and get out and not make any money? Like, the whole purpose is to go to college to get a degree so you can better your life. So why would I do that? So to take us back to how I ended up in this for 15 years, I literally I've always had pride in who I am. I don't know where that came from. I guess it came from my parents, the way they raised me. And I've always had pride in my community, as being a Black male, and growing up being a Black young man into a Black man. And so one thing that I've always found myself doing is just pushing my friends that look like me. I've always had this accountability thing that I would literally, like, my friends had to point this out to me. I would literally ask, let me see your progress report. Like, let me, what your grades look like, and just get on them about, like, you are not showing up for us. Like, I need you to do better. So I've always had that inner do better. Like, we can do better. We all can do better since I was a young kid. And so what ended up happening is that my senior year, in college, in high school, I was always told, go to college, go to college, go to college. I'm the first to go to college. I never knew anything about college. I just didn't know anything about the process. Fonz, when I said I knew nothing, I didn't know you had to fill out an application, that you had to pay for the application. I knew nothing because no one was there. I'm from a very small town that was there to school me. But my high school counselor, Miss Swindell, came to me and said, hey, there's a scholarship to be a teacher. And it's a $26,000 scholarship that all you have to do is repay it by teaching in a low performing community, or a community that needed help in North Carolina. And so I was like, $26,000. I grew up pretty poor. I ain't never heard of $26,000 before in my life. And so I knew that my parents would not necessarily give me any money to go to college. So I was just like, let's just take a chance. And I ended up getting the scholarship, ended up going to NC State, home of the Wolfpack. And so I graduated, and from there, I really started my journey in education. So I don't think things happen by chance. I think this is something I was destined to be. I just didn't know that I needed that extra push from my counselor to say, hey, here's a scholarship, and it's going to give you $26,000. And so my college 4 years were pretty free. I've gotten other scholarships and everything like that. And so that began the journey of me becoming a teacher. And that's how I stumbled upon education, or was guided by what I believe what I was meant to do, is be an educator.
Excellent. Well, that's such a great story because I again, all it takes is sometimes just one person to just give you
Yeah.
that push, and that makes a huge difference. And that's something that I truly believe in. Just like you said, being in the classroom and learning. Obviously, that not every student is dealt the same cards. Not every student, comes in or is afforded the same opportunities. But one thing that I always said, is I always encourage them to kind of break that cycle. It's what you see in your environment does not define who you are, and that you can actually be that one person, that one spark that can change that cycle, or just break that cycle altogether and just start just a new path. And so just the fact that you received that encouragement and you said, wow, $26,000,
Yeah.
and you got into college. And now let me ask you, so again, being a math teacher and doing math, so then math was something that was fairly easy for you, or was it something that you just kind of had, I want to say, like, either great teachers, or was it just kind of something that you just said, let me just kind of go with math? Where did that come from?
So my mom, who's in heaven now, and my brother, my family, my close knit family that I grew up with, will tell you that James loves being right. And so, as a little kid, when I found a subject that I could literally check that I was right and prove that I was right, oh, I fell in love. Like I immediately fell in love with math growing up, and so when I learned that there was such a thing out there, and I don't know, it's just something a part of me just love seeing that, oh, I'm right, oh, I'm right, oh, and I can prove that I'm right, and I can see that I'm right. Like it just grew in me. And so I had some great teachers along the way. One teacher specifically changed my life, Mrs. Simmons, who I had in eighth grade. So in my small school, and sometimes in my stories, the stories of so many other people, there were gifted students, and they were labeled as gifted, and they literally left the classroom to do their gifted stuff. So I remember sitting in a classroom, and I was always making the honor roll, and it was just me and my best friend Chester, who was in the class. It was two black males in the class, and I just saw all the white students would leave the classroom. And I'm just like, but my grades are better than y'all's. Like, I don't understand. Why do y'all get to go off and do the gifted stuff? And I'm left here in this classroom. And so in eighth grade, Mrs. Simmons, who taught the gifted students in Algebra 1 at that time, she gave me and my best friend Chester, along with this other young man, Adam Dietz, she gave us this placement test to get into Algebra 1. And so I loved math, but I had never struggled with math until that year because I had no pre-algebra foundation like the gifted kids had. They were in pre-algebra in seventh grade, and then they moved to algebra in eighth grade. And so I found myself in what we call the productive struggle in math, and I fell in love with struggling to find the answer. And so it changed my life because I finally got on the track with the gifted kids, and I now felt like I was included in their world, which I felt excluded from because they always literally left my world to go do their thing in another space. And so that's pretty much how the math came about, and where it just grew and grew and grew and grew, from little James doing math and like, oh, I'm right, to eighth grade, to high school, to college.
And that's great. That's such a great story. One thing that I do want to highlight, like you said, is the ability that you had with mathematics to prove that you were right. And this is interesting because currently, like I told you a little bit pre-chat, my colleague who's the math content specialist,
Hmm.
he's an amazing math teacher. He's been doing it, I think he said like 19 years in the
Wow.
classroom, plus what he's been doing as a curriculum or yeah, math content specialist. And then myself for 8 years, being actually 11 years, kind of being a math teacher from high school to elementary. I have learned so much from him because when I came into as a math teacher, I taught math the way that I learned how to teach math. Yet when I kind of started hanging around with him, I was like, what is this that you're doing? And he would show how we would do addition and subtraction all the way from K through fifth, using manipulatives, area model, using all these strategies that I had never seen. But looking at the way that he shares his practice with teachers, sometimes I think, man, I wish I can go back in time and teach my students this way, because this is where I'm getting at, where a student, and I have seen it now, that when a student is able to prove that they're right as far as an answer, maybe they didn't do it the standard algorithm, but they
Hmm.
did it using either manipulatives or drawings, but they get the answer, they feel confident and they feel like, man, I can do this. That although I may not figure out the algorithm yet, but I know for sure that this answer is right because I used my models here. I used my, fraction strips and diagrams and so on. So I think that's something that's very powerful that you mentioned, and so I love that you threw that in there. Now let me ask you. So now, okay, you had your love for math, you pursued that. So let me ask you about your first experience in the classroom, coming in, freshly graduated and now being in the classroom. What was that like? And maybe if you can add, what is one thing you wish somebody would have told you before you started, that day one?
Yeah. So it's funny because, like you said, I learned math pretty much probably the same way you learned it. Algorithms, memory, procedural things. It was very little conceptual understanding. And so I'll tell this story, then I'll tell how I got into the classroom. I remember sitting in I think it was my junior or senior year in college, and my professor, Dr. Lee Stiff, God rest his soul, I did not know how big of a math person he was, but he was literally the president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the national president, and he was my professor in college. He never mentioned anything like that. First black professor I ever had, first black male professor I ever had. And he literally asked us one day, why does A squared plus B squared equal C squared? It just asked us, why does that work? And none of us could answer that question in the classroom. And the reason why we couldn't answer the question, because no one showed us why. They just told us how to work it out. And so Dr. Lee Stiff had the amazing ability to make you feel this small when you didn't know an answer. And so all of us was looking like, we can't tell you why this works. We just know that it works for a right triangle. We know how to solve for the missing side, and there it is. Like, we know that in the word problems, oh, that's going to make a right triangle. I need to find that missing side. That's the situation. So he finally showed us why, and I was like, what? That's why? And so getting into the classroom, and I'll take you to your actual question, but getting into the classroom, I found myself struggling in the beginning because all of a sudden everybody was asking why, and no one shared it before I got there. So it's just like, why does this work? Why does this work? Why does this work? And so I finally began to ask myself the same question. This is why geometry was so hard for me, because in math growing up, all of a sudden you get to a math that you have to reason through and know proofs and analyze. And before then, you never really analyzed anything. You were told this is what you need to do, this is what you need to solve. And now you want me to prove? I haven't had a chance to prove anything along the way. And then you get to geometry. And that's why I suffered so much in geometry. I didn't understand geometry until I started teaching it. And I was like, this makes sense. Now that I know that I need to make sense of everything. And so I found myself struggling making sense of the math because I didn't know. And so I started teaching myself and asking myself, well, James, why does this work? I remember the first time I asked myself, why does anything raised to zero power? Why is it one? Like, literally, why is it one? And then you see the progressions as you're moving down the power, you're dividing by the base. It makes sense for it to be one and not zero. And so the same questions my kids were asking me, I began to ask myself, which then changed my prep, which brings me back to my point that you were asked. What is one thing that I wish someone would have taught me before I went into the classroom? The why. Just the why. There needs to be in our prep for college, those classes before we teach the math, we need a class to teach us how to teach the math. Like, just because I can do Calc 2, which I had to take in middle school mathematics, all the way up to that, doesn't mean I know how to teach triangle sum theorem. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that I know how to explain that. It doesn't mean that I know how to explain translations and transformations on a number line. It doesn't mean if I can explain integers to students. Just because I can do math doesn't mean that I can teach it in a way that students can digest it. So I think that is something that our preparatory programs need to include more of. Why does this work, and how do you teach the why of mathematics?
Ooh, I love everything you said. That's going to be a huge soundbite that I'll probably share with my math content specialist, and we'll probably end up putting it in all our Google Classrooms that we have for our teachers, because we're always sharing content. But the content that we do share is the why, because
Yeah.
oftentimes, like I said, that's the way that I taught it. Is just, well, this is why, this is it. Like, we don't share why we do things, and so now that I'm learning from him, he actually explains the why. For example, doing area model, like the area, and then how the manipulatives or the area model works when you get to ninth grade, when they're multiplying, with variables and
Yep.
equations. And it just blows my mind. And but this is the why. He explains it, and I'm like, wow, like this just makes so much sense now. Excellent. All right. Well, James, let's continue a little bit more about our conversation, because obviously, you did talk a little bit about, in your school setting, I think you said it was in the classroom setting, it was only everybody else except for the exception of you three students that were not included in the gifted or the gifted activities. So tell me a little bit about that as far as now the work that you do. I know that what you do is we talk about inclusivity for all, equity in the classroom, which is something that is so important. So, how did that come about too, as far as your not only math teaching, but really bringing that type of content and bringing that kind of teaching where you're bringing people together? Tell me
Mhm.
about that. Where did that passion spark?
So that passion comes from my story. I literally know now as a grown man that the same I had some kind of knowledge of the expectation for me. But looking back now, I know the same expectation for me was not the same expectation for my white peers. And I understand, bias is unconscious bias or bias in general. If you and this is where empathy comes into place. And this is why when I talk about my story, it comes from a place where I understand how we work as human beings. So if you grow up in a community and the majority of the black males in that community are not performing as well as the white males or white females, the expectation is every year you see the same thing. And then I show up on the scene as a black male, and it's like, hey, I love learning. I want to learn, and I'm going to perform at the same rate. If you constantly seeing the same thing as an educator that these students can and these students can't, well, the expectation for me is that why would I be any different when I rarely see that? And so my work now is centering around like you need to identify that as educators, we get conditioned in believing in who can and who cannot unconsciously. Like, and you have to unpack that because of the simple fact that you're a human. If you walked outside every day throughout the week and it was always sunny, you expect the very next day it to be sunny. Like it's in our environment. That's what we've been trained to do. And the one day that is raining, like if you're in LA, you don't expect to walk outside and see thunderstorms throughout the entire week. No, that's what you expect in Seattle. You expect rain there. And so that's what we've been conditioned to believe. And so a lot of the work that I do is allowing teachers to see that, because if you don't see that and you don't recognize that, then you will never challenge that thought. And that thought needs to be challenged because you have now said to yourself unconsciously that these kids are able to and these are not. And so the work that I do is to tell you, first of all, you're saying it, whether you believe it or not, because I believe it, even as a black man, you know what I'm saying? I have to always test and make sure and try and just question my beliefs around certain things. And then tell you to now say, but they can. And a part of my work is convincing teachers, convincing educators, convincing principals, convincing parents, convincing the kids. Because when they see the same thing, when you walk into a classroom, I teach at a very diverse school, and it's one of the most amazing schools ever. But when you walk into the math classrooms, you can see that it's the highest level because of who's in the class. And so students believe that they don't belong there because they don't see anybody like them in that class. And so my passion for changing that is the fact that, first of all, I know I can do math, and I'm not this. I used to, and I'm gonna be done after this. Fine, I'm sorry. You just you hit a nail, and I just got to go. But I used to marvel at the fact that I was the only one. Growing up in the space that I was in, I went to a predominantly white school. I went to a predominantly white high school, and so many times I was there as the only black man, or one of two. I don't want that narrative anymore. I don't want to be the only one. I want there to be others, because when there are others, then it's convincing other people like, oh, they belong in this space too. And to convince people that look like me, like we belong in this space as well. And so that's where a lot of my passion comes from.
Excellent. Well, I love that, the passion that you share, and I absolutely agree as far as, and Amanda's joining us here. Amanda, even she's throwing in the 100, So thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us here. But what you said, the convincing part, it's so interesting because I mean, yeah, I know we were talking about this pre-chat, and I mean, I'm here in deep South Texas where it's pretty much, 99%, all Hispanic, here. But there's this notion too, like, I mean, you have that bias where teachers are like, oh well, oh, you're gonna get that kid, oh well, that kid is this and this. And I was always that one teacher that I was like, I don't know what you're saying, because I mean, they're doing the work here and they're doing everything great. And I had to convince my teachers, I had to convince my counselors, and like you said, a lot of convincing to say, like, you know what, like, they can do it.
Right.
They're able to, they have the ability. They just maybe never were taught, for example, standard algorithm all the time, and they can't figure out the standard algorithm. But here's 10 other worksheets to practice the standard algorithm until you get it, rather than say, hey, let me show you how you can do this with a pictorial model, or let me explain this to you in a different way.
Hmm.
And then the students just light up when they're like, oh, that's all I have to do. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's all you have to do. And now you've got a student building up their confidence, but now it's convincing the teacher to say, oh, yes, they can. They can
Yeah.
absolutely do it. And so what you're saying there just really resonates with me, because that's constantly what I remember, when we had the option to group our students. And so at the beginning of the year, they're like, okay, we're going to put these students together. These are not. And I was like, why? I mean, and I get it goes with kind of what you're saying, and but again, there's always some flaws there in the education system in that sense. But yes, recognizing the bias, recognizing those preconceived notions of students really does, can do some damage, because then you're not really giving your effort in making sure that that student is successful, because you just say, it's all right, like they'll figure it out next year, just pass them along, they're not going to get it this year. I'm like, come on, so
Yeah.
anyway, that really spoke to me there too. So I kind of had to get that out too as well. All right. So now, like you're talking, being a black male educator, can you tell me a little bit about that experience, or what that was like for you, when you first started? Did you get, just kind of like, well, like, kind of what are they doing here, or what, like, this is different, and again, I'm only asking because this is something that I'm not very familiar with, and I want to learn more and see things through a different lens. So
Hmm.
again, this is a learning experience for me. Can you share a little bit about what your experience was like in the very beginning, and maybe some obstacles or barriers that you have faced and overcome?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Fonz, and something that I'm not asked a lot. So it made me think about that a little bit while you were talking. So I remember stepping into the classroom and at different schools, and there were a different emotion. One of the emotions was just like, oh my God, I didn't know you were here. I remember because I left North Carolina and I went to move to Pittsburgh, and literally an open house. Parents, and specifically the Black parents, will come in and say, I did not know you were here. I did not know who you were. Because, James O'Neill, I mean, it doesn't necessarily speak Black male, it could be anybody. So when parents saw me for the first time, they were shocked, and they felt relieved. And so I received those feelings more so than what are you doing here? More so than anything, because parents want there to be representation. And there is one thing that when you grow up culturally, not saying all Black people are the same, we are not, we're all different, everybody's different. But there are common struggles, there is a common thread within Black America that many of us experience. And so when a parent and many of the grandparents walked to the classroom and saw a Black man as a math teacher, it brought joy to their heart. On the flip side, I ended up leaving one district and going into a district that was 97% white. And so showing up in that space was a lot challenging for me. I look back now and I knew that it was something that God wanted me to do, because it didn't make sense. It's like, why are you doing this? This makes no sense. It's not even your demographics. It's not even the people that you serve. It's not even the people that you're passionate about, even though I'm passionate about all scholars. But you know why you're in education. You're there to lift up those individuals that look like you. But when I walked into in that space, there was a lot that I need to learn about myself. First of all, my value, I had this internalized, what I recognize now was internalized racism when it came to myself, how I viewed myself as less than because of my race, and feeling like I had to show up and work as 50 times harder than anybody else because I carried all Black people on my shoulder. I had to let a lot of that stuff go, and I had to see people for who they were, and then see people past their race. So there was a lot of things that I worked on. But when you are in a predominantly white space like that, and they see a Black man, they have never seen a Black man in a math role or in a teacher role ever in their life. And the 2% of students that were students of color, 3% students of color, they're looking like, we've never seen you in that role either. And so I've always had different experiences, varying experiences, more welcoming than anything, because people recognize that representation does matter. And when they meet me and they look past my race and realize that this guy really cares about education, it's all that matters.
Excellent. Wow. Well, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. Like I said, and again, this is definitely a learning experience for myself, but hopefully for everybody. So, going along those lines too, James, I wanted to ask, it's like, how can teachers and educators challenge some of these traditional notions of academic achievement also and create these inclusive, equitable classrooms?
One of the things that I'm always going to land on, funds, is our mindsets. We have to challenge our mindset, and until somebody challenges it, we're two are always better than one. You can only see what you see. When you bring somebody else in to be like, do you know you did that? Do you know you talk that way? Do you know you lean? I have a friend, a colleague next door, and she videotaped herself, and she realized that she talked to the females way more than she talked to the males. And it's only because she recorded herself and saw like she leaned towards more female heavy, and then she corrected that practice. Again, someone has to come in and say, not always, but many times it just helps for someone to challenge our mindsets. And so if we deal with the mindset and really deal with the fact that all students can, and then show teachers how to teach in a way that welcomes all students and the brilliance of students, and that you're not the person that's carrying all the information. Give them a chance to struggle, give them a chance to formulate reasoning, give them a chance to talk to their partner and make connections. Your mind starts to change, because you start to see kids do things that you've never thought, Fonz, that they're able to do before, because you've never given them the ability, because you didn't believe that they could. And so that has to be challenged first before mathematical practices, instructional practice from teachers really go to the next level. That's my firm belief.
Wow, excellent. I love that. And I love the passion that you are bringing with this, James. Thank you so much for that experience. So, let's talk also a little bit more of the work that you're doing, just kind of out there. Like you said, you started your LLC, and of course, you do a lot of the public speaking. But if you can tell us a little bit about, of course, and I'm just reading here straight from your website where it says you are a
Mhm.
champion of equity for all, bringing mastery for all, and raising the expectations for all. Where did that come from as far as equity for all, mastery for all, and expectations for all?
Yeah, so it's weaved in my story. I've had, and I say this humbly but unapologetically, I've had a lot of success with students' growth in my class. And when I started seeing the growth that my students were making, I really started to dive in to say, what am I doing that's different from other people? And my colleague next door, who has amazing growth as well, her growth is even higher than mine. I began to ask her and probe her, what are you doing that this is not necessarily happening even in our building among other teachers? And no shade to that. That when kids get in our classroom, we are able to take kids to another level. And so, like the mastery for all, the equity for all, the expectation for all, when those things are combined, really the expectations as a foundation, which then speaks to equity, then will speak to the mastery of the students. When those expectations are set, we just believe students can. We just really believe that we can teach math in a way that students can get it. And I tell my kids all the time, I just believe that this makes sense. And when it makes sense, to you and you can make it make sense with somebody else, that is an equity move, because so many kids, Fonz, are sitting in math classrooms specifically and not getting it. And when they don't get it, they are not going to try. And when they don't try, then they're not going to master. And when they don't master, Fonz, what's up? We know what's going to happen. The same gaps between the same group of individuals, usually predictable by race, continues to grow wider and wider and wider. And so that's where a lot of that mastery for all, equity for all, expectation for all really comes from.
And I love that you said, one of the things that my math content specialist, and a big shout out to him, Richard Palomine, one thing that he says, and very similar kind of what you're saying, is if the student is successful, the student is not going to be a behavior issue. So that's kind of his mentality when he goes
Mhm.
out and shares with teachers. He says, if you have students, and of course that may not always be the case, but he says that if you do have a student that is struggling, that struggling turns into frustration. That frustration when the student can't be successful and is not quite, learning at the level of somebody else, they kind of give up, and then they may become, they're voicing their help, but sometimes they may, misbehave to kind of get some of that help or some of that attention. But he says, if you help them succeed and just showing them more than just the standard algorithm, but you have maybe two or three options that you can go to, and then they start seeing like, wow, okay, I got this, I can do it this way, then that really helps. And so it kind of goes a little bit what you're saying, that
Yeah.
mastery, and of course if they're successful, they're going to feel great, they're going to continue moving forward, they're going to be paying attention, they're going to continue to grow, and that's absolutely what we want for all of our students. So okay, so going back to, what you were speaking about as far as the classroom, what we now that we're kind of almost wrapping up here, I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you, what is some advice for any educators out there, regardless of where they may be, that you can give to them as far as, culturally responsive teaching? What could we do better that you think might be just something incremental, one little thing that can make a big incremental difference right from the get-go?
I love this question, Fonz. I love it. I had a student teacher this past year, and with this student teacher, I realized that she was formulating the belief that the students cannot, because they were not having success on a particular concept. And because I've been the teacher for many years, I was like, oh, but they can. And I said, don't blame those kids. Ask yourself, what can you do differently so that they get it? Ask yourself, what are they not understanding? And when she asked herself that, she found the root of the issue, went in the classroom the very next day, corrected it, and then the students got it. And so if there is a practice that I constantly believe at the core of great mastery teaching, is not blaming the kids. Asking yourself, what can you do to present the material in a way that is different so that they can get it? Or asking yourself, what is the missing concept? Because if we don't do that, we start blaming kids, that we start saying they can't get it. But if I put them in a different classroom, they can. So it can't be the kids. It got to be something that I'm presenting, and it takes maturity for you to realize, like, look in the mirror. I'm the issue. It's not the kids. They can get it. There's something that I'm missing. And I think with that practice, you will always become a better teacher, because you're not blaming those kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now when you said that, I don't know if you saw my face kind of react, because that reflection piece is so important. And what happened, and I'll just kind of tell this, quick story, because it was a learning experience for both, myself and my colleague, when I first transitioned into sixth grade, which here in our district is still considered elementary. We have K through six, and then
Okay.
seven, eight, and then nine. So I came in from ninth grade teaching, and then now teaching sixth grade. And what happened is, I was teaching, I was like, all right, getting used to sixth grade kids. And I was like, well, there isn't much of a difference except the age, but the maturity was still kind of the same at the time. But I worked with a colleague. So there was two pods. And what happened is one day, or I think maybe she was out for a couple of days. She had laryngitis. And so my principal said, hey, can you teach her math class, and kind of go back and forth while she's out so she doesn't, fall behind or the kids fall behind. And I was like, sure, no problem. And so I started teaching the kids just the way that I would my own kids. And, the students were like, wow. They're like, Mr. Mendoza, like, like I understand this. Like this, you make this so much easier, and I'm understanding. And they got really excited. So for 2 days, I did the math class and so on. Teacher comes back, my colleague comes back, she's doing a lot better. But man, those kids were just very like, wow, they like ripped into her in the way, like, well, I don't like the way you explain it. Mr. Mendoza explains it a lot easier and so on. And so that caused a little bit of friction. But when we
Mhm.
both sat down and we talked, and we said, I said, well, look, let me show you what I did a little different, which wasn't much more different than what she did. It was just the way the explanation, the pictorial aspect of it that I taught. And then, but like I said, it was a beautiful growing experience for both of us in the sense that I was able to help, but I also learned, that not everybody teaches or the same way the math,
Yeah.
even though,
Yep.
we do have standards, but the delivery can be different. And
Yes.
just that one little tweak in delivery can make a huge difference for a kid's success. So yeah, definitely wonderful. So I love that, that piece of just reflecting, turning the mirror on yourself, because oftentimes the root, like you said, is not with the kids, but it could be with ourselves. So
Yeah.
thank you for that, James. That's just wonderful insight. I really appreciate it. And, this has been just an amazing conversation and just really exciting. Love your energy and I love the work that you're doing. And before we go into that last segment where I love to ask my guests these final three questions, if you can, James, please make sure that you share and plug how can our audience members connect with you, not only maybe just to, maybe ask some questions, but maybe some possible, ways that you can come and do some speaking for their districts. What's the best way that they can get a hold of you?
Well, my website is probably the best way because it has all my contact information, www.mrjamesoneil.com. But my social media handle is on the screen at Mr.James O'Neill, and that's on Instagram and Facebook, and then Twitter. You lose the remove the period because somebody had already took that name. So, but it's Mr. James O'Neill, and that's the best way to contact me if you really feel like you want to email info@mrjamesoneil.com will also be a great way to speak or get in contact with me.
Excellent. Well, James, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But before we go, let's go ahead and wrap up with my favorite segment too, as well, asking our guests these final three questions. So, question number one, James, in the current state of education, what would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
Current edu kryptonite. Um, it is the mindset that these kids can't. That thing just no, don't do. That mindset that these kids can't, these kids can't, is a kryptonite to me.
Excellent. All right. Great question. And absolutely right. I have to agree with you on that one. All right. Now, let's see if you thought about something for this one. Question number two. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Fonz, I don't want to sound this repetitive, but it's going to definitely be all kids can do math. And the reason why is because, like what I said earlier, that this subject is a gateway subject. And that the gates are opened up wide. Even in middle school, we start to see the gates start to push down high school content. And so there are literally kids getting ahead of the game in middle school. So when they get to high school, they're already ahead. So they now get to push down college courses. And so I just want to scream it out loud. All kids can do math.
Excellent. And I second that big time because I am a true believer of that now. Like I said, even in my self-reflecting in my 8 years of practice, actually 11 years of practice, and like I said, teaching math the way that I was taught, I'm thankful that students did understand because I was still able to kind of personalize the learning and do a lot of one-on-one sessions and things of that sort. However, reflecting on this years later and of course with what I've learned, I absolutely, truly at the core believe that all kids can definitely math. They totally can for sure.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right, James. The last three questions, and I know that you are a podcaster yourself, so this should be maybe kind of easy, but let's say that this tonight, this was the Mr. James O'Neill show, and I was your guest. What would be one question you'd like to ask me?
I would love to just hear a piece of your origin story.
All right, piece of my origin story. Well, very similar, I guess, in a way to you, in the sense that I didn't want to be an educator. Sort of, I said I want to definitely make some more money, and so I went into business school, graduated in 2003, did sales and marketing. Fork in the road moment due to dad's illness, but he's great now. He's going to be 87 this year and still
Amazing.
going strong. So praise God for that. And then I fell into education and I absolutely fell in love with education. I mean, like my passion for learning and my passion for teaching and for everything that I get to do. And even now, with the podcasting, I'm still learning. And my mission, like you said, like I shared earlier, connecting educators, creators, one show at a time, and
Mhm.
amplifying educator voices, giving them a space where they can come like yourself and just really let loose and share that passion so people can hear it anywhere that this podcast can be heard, and just, try and give back to to education, this landscape that has given me so much. So that's kind of like the really
Mhm.
abbreviated version of my origin story there.
Got you. I love it. I absolutely
Excellent.
love it.
Well, James, it has been an honor, a pleasure. I love your work. I love your energy. Continue doing what you're doing because you're doing some great things. And, definitely stay connected, because once you are a guest of the show, you always have an open invite. Anytime if you have a big project or big announcements or anything,
Uh-huh.
please feel free to contact. And this platform is yours for you to share what you are doing. So thank you so much again for just this insightful show and for my learning. And of course, Amanda here is throwing this out too. Thank you, James. Jill Du Bois, thank you so much for joining us too. And for all our audience members that are going to be catching this on the replay, thank you so much as always for making my EdTech life what it is today. Please don't forget to visit our website at myedtech.life, myedtech.life. And please make sure you drop us a review, give us 5 stars, go to our podcast, give us a like, give us a share, give us a follow. So that way the algorithms can go ahead and share this out to many more people. And if you'd love to contribute to our mission, please make sure that you visit our website, where we also have a merch store. So you can get yourself a cap, you can get yourself a shirt, and just know that that all goes back into the show. This show, again, is really my passion and my mission as far as amplifying educator voices. So, again, thank you for making this platform what it is today through all of your support. I really appreciate you all. And don't forget, my friends, as always, until next time, stay techie.